We'll kick it off with this. The bottom line is this. Our country doesn't have a partisan problem, a political problem, a social problem, or an economic problem. We have a spiritual problem. In the absence of God, Americans across partisan lines have turned to government and celebrity for their gods. They have gone off to worship idols. At the core, they have reverted to the original mistake made in the Garden of Eden. They choose to see themselves as gods, which explains the title, You Shall Be as Gods, pretty darn well. So put some meat on those bones for us, Eric.
We're seeing this on the left and the right with the increase in despair, the suicide rate, depression, the rise of transgenderism, people believing they can make themselves as they see fit. It transcends partisanship to this deep underpinning of we as people have now lost our perspective on who we are, why we're here, and what our purpose is. We're called to something higher. We're called to something eternal. We're created in the image of God and have instead decided that this is the best we have here and now. And you see this manifest in politics, for example, with the left, where if your neighbor drives a gas-guzzling SUV and has 5 kids and you've done everything right, your house is on solar panels, you're a vegan, and you aborted your child, so it's just you and your partner, you're still going to burn because of your neighbor. So your neighbor's got to be punished. So we've lost a sense of grace. We've lost a sense of eternal, and people are turning to hopelessness, which is causing all sorts of tribalism and violence and despair.
I'm so interested in this because I see it everywhere in America. And the audience knows I'm just fresh back from a trip to Scandinavia where we got the same story in particular in Sweden and I think in Norway and Denmark, trying to remember exactly the guides and the information. But the central theme was we used to be Christians and then we became Lutherans or Protestants and now we're nothing. Now there's like one church and overwhelmingly our countries are not believers at all. And, you know, my family's traveling around and we would have grace and would say grace before our meals, even if we're in a restaurant. People would stare, you know, like, what are they doing? Mm-hmm. And you could feel like I really love the visit. I don't mean to rip on these lovely people.
Wonderful people, beautiful country.
They absolutely right. But while they kept saying that they're the happiest people or second happiest people on earth, I guess Finland ranks number 1 and Denmark ranks number 2 and Sweden's up there as well. They also are either number 1 or number 2 on antidepressants. And yes, in large part, I'm sure it has to do with the many hours of darkness for 10 months of the year. You know, it's 16 to 20 hours of darkness. But there's another form of darkness in those countries as a result of what we're talking about, Eric. And I do think the absence of God and an active belief, an active faith in your life leads to a different kind of listlessness that they may not even be aware they've lost.
Well, so not to get too deep theologically, but, you know, if you go to the Old Testament, there are all these commandments for the Israelites of you can't have tattoos or mix fabric clothing or eat certain foods. And the reason was we can extract from that the cultures around them were cultures where those things happened. Tattoos were very common. Now, fast forward to today, my wife has tattoos. It's hard to find a youth minister in a church in America who doesn't. It's our culture has the Christian culture has absorbed the culture around it, and we look like it. And so what the New Testament says, the Old Testament was you behave differently, dress differently, do differently. And what the New Testament says is you've got to stand out in your community by loving your neighbor and loving God. And even in a lot of churches, we don't have that tendency anymore, where a Christian is supposed to be someone who stands out and acts a little weird to the culture around them and seems to have a little joy the rest of the culture doesn't. And that culture, it's losing the joy. And it kind of is time for churches to stand up. Politics isn't going to fix this. It's the people who know there's an eternity we're called to, who have the joy because they know it. I mean, look, as you know, Megyn, my wife has this incurable form of lung cancer. There's no cure for it. And yet we live every day with this joy that if God forbid the worst case scenario happens, she's going on to eternity. And we've got her now, and we should live like that. And the world, I think, has forgotten that. There's so many people who think it's here and now, this is all we have. And look at how bad it is, as opposed to just love your neighbor. You're never going to fix Washington, D.C., but if you fix your town and be a part of it and show you love your town, well, you're going to find your salvation there here on earth.
You know, I in principle, I agree with it. But then when you get into the book and you talk about, sort of the politics of revenge, and because you're critical of the left, of course, in the ways that we're discussing, but also of what you call the new right and kind of where they're going. But I wonder if we're on the same page on it, because we've been talking on the show about the lawfare against Trump. And I've gotten to the point where I really feel like the only way the left is going to stop doing this is if we do it to them. That's just the only way. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not something I agree with, but I feel like the only way of stopping it is to give them a taste of their own medicine, because until they have the same skin in the game, they're going to keep doing it. And we're talking about the presidency. So is that what you're talking about? Because
So there's
think
an
I'm
individual,
okay on
there's
this.
a corporate level. So at an individual level, we got to love our neighbor. And in fact, I occasionally preach in churches, and this comes up, and I tell them, you as a person of faith need to love your far left transgender progressive neighbor enough that when they go on vacation, they want to leave a key with you to make sure their house is safe where they're gone. At a corporate level, as American citizens, yeah, I do agree that we on the right have the means within the law to do to the left and use the precedents the left has set so that they can say, maybe we should stop setting these precedents. I mean, for example, a great example is the president has used the Civil Rights Act to go after pro-lifers who are blocking access to abortion clinics. We should be doing the same thing to pro-Hamas supporters blocking access to synagogues. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. There are ways to do it. Where I think I draw the line, though, is we should not be engaged so much in revenge that we're willing to cross legal lines that then they cross. Because inevitably we see the cycle where each side makes precedent. And at some point, we've all lost concept of the law. And those of us who are people of faith should be the ones who are saying, maybe we should go throw the ring back in the volcano and nobody have this power. And I personally think my solution is Republicans, when they get back to power, gut the power. So the left can't do these things to us. We can't do it to them. And that takes away the desire to everyone control Washington. We made Washington too powerful. And we need to go back to remembering that we have 50 sovereign states and let the power be diffused that way.
I agree with that. I mean, I can't stand a strong federal government. That's not how this country was envisioned. We've morphed into some weird Frankenstein version of what, Madison and Jefferson envisioned. And now we've morphed into this bloated, disgusting mess that tries to govern everybody in the way they live. And it needs to shrink. No matter who's in the Oval Office, it needs to shrink dramatically.
Honestly, the greatest revenge we could have on the left is to take back power and get rid of the power so they can never use it again. They can't sick the EPA on people. They can't sick the National Labor Relations Board on people. Take away all their power.
All right, but what about this absence of spirituality that's infecting us? Because, you have some good stats in the book, and we've talked about them on the show. In 2021, Pew Research released the results of a survey that showed nearly 30% of Americans considered themselves unaffiliated with any religion. The percentage of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, doubled in just over a decade. In the same time period, self-identified Christians dropped from 75% to 63% of the population. So why? Why is that happening? What is it about us today?
The data's actually really interesting when you get into the subset. A lot of the nuns and the unaffiliated people, they're still believers. They're just kind of tired of going to church and hearing political sermons, or they're tired of hearing preachers say something that they don't practice. The fastest growing denominations in the country are actually the deeply evangelical denominations that practice what they preach. And I think for the conservative side of things, pulling back the curtain a little bit, while you and I are talking on your show, I'm pretending to do my show live as well. And I can tell you what I'm talking about right now is that conservatives like to build alternative institutions, and then we're always surprised when the left eventually takes them over too, because we've built it and we say, okay, we've done this, we've done a good thing. No, stay involved. So I've got a friend of mine in Atlanta. His kids go to public school and he's a preacher. He's the head of the PTA. His wife's the head of the talent show. They've got all the other Christians in the school so involved that they've largely taken over in a way that oftentimes you don't see in public schools. We can't just build an institution and rest on our laurels. We've got to stay engaged. It's not a coincidence that most of the food banks and soup kitchens in the country run by churches are run by theologically progressive churches. Conservatives can do these things too. We should be doing these things.
Let me tell you a story about a guy named Leo Grillo. Leo was on a road trip and came across a Doberman. Now, this dog was severely underweight and clearly in trouble. Leo rescued the dog and named him Delta. Sadly, Delta was just one of so many animals that needed help. And this inspired Leo to start Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill care for life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness, and they provide their animals with shelter, love, safety, a home. April marked 45 years since Leo rescued Delta. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions. If you would like caring for these animals to be part of your legacy, speak with your estate planner, because there are tax benefits too. You could grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and speak with your advisor. We call dog a man's best friend for a reason. You could help those who need it most. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.